What came up in the September 25 AAA exam? And what can you learn from it? How can it help you to better prepare for future exam sittings? Well, that's what I'm going to cover in this exam review video. And the first observation I've got for you is there were loads and loads of questions that drew on your knowledge of groups, group accounting, subsidiaries, associates, equity accounting, acquisition accounting, impairment of a brand. There were lots of questions here that drew on your knowledge of groups. Now, this is something I was really pleased that came up. Firstly, because I tipped it. So my students were well prepared. They knew it was coming, so they had a chance to revise. And secondly, it was in my mock exams. I did lots of stuff on groups. So this is something the examiner really likes to test. They do it regularly. It wasn't just in September 25. They do it in a lot of exam sittings. Okay, so be all over groups. Now really, you need to be all over financial reporting. Critical. So many marks are reliant on it. But in this exam particularly, groups were really important. Dealing with component auditors as well as part of a group audit. That was another thing that was tested on groups. There was loads. Second observation for you is there was a lot of knowledge questions in this exam. 4 5-mark questions that didn't require you to use the scenario, that drew on your knowledge of a technical article or on your knowledge of the syllabus. There was some stuff around key audit matters, which is an extra section that you have in a listed company audit report. There was some knowledge questions around sustainability. Why would a company want to publish sustainability metrics even if they don't have to? So how do you prepare for a knowledge question? Bearing in mind, it's probably only going to be 5 marks in total across your exam that requires you to have learned some knowledge or read a technical article. Do you memorize all the technical articles? Do you memorize the whole AAA syllabus? Not worth it. My advice that I give my students on my course, and I'd give to you as well, is you need a bit of knowledge. So read the most recent technical articles, but also be prepared to just problem solve in the exam. In the exam, they will give you a scenario, and there will be ideas in that scenario. Even if it tells you you don't have to use the scenario, you can use it. And we've practiced that a lot in my course. It's a good problem solving skill. Number 3, my third observation. The risk questions were huge. Huge. Now, there were 2 variants of question 1 in the exam. The 50-mark question. One of those variants had a 26-mark audit risk question, and the other variant had a 24-mark risk of material misstatement question. Huge risk questions. One massive requirement. I have to say, I hate this type of question. I much prefer a question that's broken down into small subparts so that if I get stuck in one bit or I don't like one part of the question, I can just move on to the next bit, have a go and move on. A great technique. But you can't do that when there are 24 or 26 marks available for a question. It's a quarter of your exam. You've got to spend a good amount of time in that question. And the reason I don't like these questions is because there is so much potential for you to fall for an examiner trap. They might put something really difficult and technical into that risk analysis. A hard bit of complicated financial reporting that many students won't be very confident on. And a student might spend ages trying to explain a really complicated risk around that financial reporting that's been done incorrectly. And they waste time. So I find these questions, no pun intended, risky. Yeah, a big risk question is risky for a student and really tests their exam technique. Now, the good thing for my students is we did practice quite a few of these big risk questions. And the better your exam technique is, the more able you are to cope with the challenges and the rigor of that sort of question. Particularly important is that you stick to your time. And that leads me on to the 4th point. Now, this feedback I got from almost every student who sat the exam, all of my students and loads of other students who contacted me on LinkedIn as well. My 4th observation is it was very time pressured, hugely time pressured, more so than normal. And I think that comes from these big risk questions. Students really find it hard to manage their time in such a huge requirement. It's so easy to overrun. Now, one of the tips that I give my students, and I kind of insist on it, and some students don't take this tip, but almost all of my students do it, is that they leave the risk question till last of all. They do question 2, then they do question 3 on the exam, then they come to question 1, and the last bit that they do in question 1 is the risk question. Leaving it till last, the advantage of that is it's much easier to stick to your timings on all the other questions because they're smaller scenarios, less exhibits, less marks. It's just easier to be disciplined. So then you get to that big risk question knowing how much time you've got and you use that time accordingly. I find that if students started with that big risk question, they're much more likely to overrun there and then be playing catch up all the way through the rest of the exam. I hope that didn't happen to you. And for future sittings, don't start with that massive question. It's a recipe for overrunning on time. Then the last observation is there was absolutely tons of ethics in this exam. Standard ethical dilemmas, but when I say standard, they're not ones that we've seen before. The details in the scenarios were very different to previous exams. And lots of questions that required you to use your judgment, like assessing management assumptions or how reliable are management representations. Those are 2 questions that were asked. Now, why does the examiner ask you an ethical dilemma that you haven't seen before? Why do they ask you questions that require you to use your judgment? Well, they're testing your higher level skills. What they don't want you to do is rote learn previous answers. They don't want you to rote learn the textbook and just write it out. That won't score marks. They're testing your ability to think, to demonstrate your auditing skills. And they do that by asking you questions that require you to use the scenario fully to answer the specific requirement that's been set. Now, on my course, we practice the skills you need loads for this. And we do lots of past exam questions as well. And lots of my questions that require you to use your judgment so that you practice these skills. But if you're studying independently, really important that you are working through recent past exam questions so you can see the style of questions they're asking here. Now, hope you found this recording useful. If you need help for a future sitting of AAA, either resitting or sitting for the first time, come join me. I will give you the very best chance of success.